this video, we will learn what social engineering attacks are and the principles that are used to carry out such attacks. To put it simply, it's the art of manipulating people to give up confidential information or resources. Such attacks are a very low-tech form of a security attack. In fact, in most cases, it doesn't necessarily require the attacker to have any sort of tech expertise at all. It involves an attacker or a group of attackers and the target organization or the victim. The attackers try to manipulate the target and gain access to sensitive information or other network resources by using social engineering techniques. Social engineering may involve one or more persons trying to gain access to the sensitive information or private data. In groups, the attackers work together in order to create a situation to manipulate the target into giving up info, such as the credentials or resources, such as money. The attackers, the group of attackers, they're all coordinating their efforts and hoping that you'll lower your guard and grant these attackers access to anything that they might need. Social engineering attacks rely on deceit and manipulation. There are a number of principles associated with social engineering attacks. When these principles are combined and used in an effective manner, the social engineering attacks have a higher chance of success. We'll start with authority. Humans tend to cooperate and listen to authority figures, and attackers who use social engineering often rely on this principle. The attacker contacts the unsuspecting victim and claims that they are from the tax department and states that the target owes the government taxes. The attacker continues to state that evading tax is a criminal offense and threatens the target with jail time. By pretending to be an authority figure, the attacker tries to scare the victim, to put pressure on the victim, and to cause the victim to panic. Panicked individuals don't think straight, and the attacker uses this to their advantage. When the victim is unable to think straight, when the victim is not able to think clearly, the attacker presents a solution when the victim is not able to think clearly. The attacker claims that the victim looks like they made a honest mistake, and the attacker assures that they'll take care of this issue, but on a condition. But only if the victim immediately clears these dues. If the victim isn't compliant with the attacker will threaten with legal action and jail time to coerce the victim into paying the money. If the victim believes the attacker, they will transfer the money to avoid legal action and jail time. In the upcoming slides, we'll be discussing how other social engineering principles complement this type of attack to make it more successful. Social proof. It's also known as consensus. By using this principle, the attackers try to use the names of people you know, or they make use of the private data they come across to come up with a believable story to convince you to justify carrying out their request. Based on the previous example, the attacker might use leaked tax identification numbers as a social proof to present themselves as a more legitimate entity. When the attacker claims that he is from the income tax department, if he states the target's name and the tax identification number correctly, then the target has more incentive to believe in the attacker. Urgency. If the person doing the social engineering can inject some type of urgency into the situation, then they can execute the attack quickly. They try to enforce the idea that this needs to happen quickly. Don't even think about it. Just provide this information right now so that we can solve this problem. The attackers create the need to act urgently to defuse a ticking time bomb. By acting now, they force the panicked victim to comply immediately or face severe consequences for not complying. They use this to prevent the target from acting in a rational manner. Scarcity. Social engineers also like to have a clock that's ticking. There needs to be scarcity. This particular situation is only going to be this way for a certain amount of time. That's what they try to sell. I'll try to explain this with an example. The attackers, they might call an unsuspecting victim and tell the victim that they are from a finance company and as part of their marketing campaign, they claim that the target won a lucky draw and that they are eligible for 80% discount on a car of their choosing. The attacker even share more details, such as the cars that fall into this offer, and they might even answer the target's questions to get them hooked onto this idea. When the target is really interested in the 80% discount, then the attacker claims that the offer won't last long and that there are many eager customers on the line. As a solution to this problem, to confirm the purchase, the attacker asks to pay a 10% token amount in advance to book the car and assures that they'll be sent a receipt for their purchase. If the victim believes that this is real, then they will transfer the money and lose their money. Familiarity. Another technique that attackers use is one of familiarity. They become your friend, or at least they pretend to be your friend. They talk about things that you like. And by doing that, they make the target feel like the attacker can be trusted. They use this trust to make the victim do things for them. Honey trap attacks work on this principle. Types of social engineering attacks. Based on the principles we discussed, the attacker tries to incorporate them into their preferred type of social engineering attacks. In the upcoming slides, we'll be discussing different types of social engineering attacks. Phishing. Phishing is one of the most popular social engineering attacks. The attacker sends a fake email to steal from victims. The attacker, in this case, sends a lot of emails, thousands of emails, to thousands of email IDs in hopes that maybe 100 of them will respond to this email. Now, there's a more specific version to it, known as spear phishing. Spear phishing is a targeted attack where criminals disguise themselves as legitimate sources to convince targeted specific victims to give up confidential information or steal money. Instead of sending out mass emails and hoping that out of the thousands of emails that they sent, maybe 100 might respond to them. Instead, they'll select their target. They'll do some research on the target and ensure that the targets meet certain requirements. And then they'll work on a way to come up with a convincing scenario to convince the targeted victim to give up confidential information or steal money. Spear phishing requires a bit of legwork. They study the victim, and according to the victim, they develop a specific scenario. They engineer a scenario to convince the target to give up confidential information or steal the money. Credential harvester attack. In this attack vector, a website will be cloned, and when the victim enters the user credentials, the usernames and passwords will be copied from this fake site, and the victim will then be redirected to the legitimate site. In credential harvester attacks, they select a website, and then they clone this website, and then they redirect the victims to this cloned website. The victim, they believe that this duplicate website is the original website and they try to log in with their credentials. And the attackers will capture this credentials and save it on their device. The attackers will use this captured credentials to gain access to the user accounts, to gain access to the victim accounts. Baiting. It's one of the most common and simplest social engineering attacks. It is similar to phishing attacks. Baiting uses false promises to lure unsuspecting victims to give up sensitive information or to get the victim to download malicious files. Examples of this include free video game downloads from sketchy websites. These sketchy websites bait the victims to download malicious files when the victim thinks that he is downloading a free game. DNS spoofing. DNS spoofing, it's also known as DNS cache poisoning. It's an attack where the attacker uses a fake website and redirect the users to this fake website to steal data. Credential harvester attack relies on DNS spoofing. The victim believes that the victim is accessing the legitimate site and proceeds to reveal the login credentials, and the attacker will capture this by the DNS spoofing. Honey trap. As we've discussed in the previous slides, honey trap social engineering attack relies on the principle of familiarity. It's a social engineering attack that uses friendship or sexual relationships to lure the victim into divulging private information. The attackers, they use spear phishing techniques to select the target and then they try to become the victim's friends. As the attacker gains the victim's trust, they slowly start making things more sexual, and they get the victim to share their private photos. Once the attacker captures the private photos, the attacker can blackmail the victim for money. The attacker can threaten the victim that they'll be posting these pictures online. Tailgating. Tailgating is a physical security breach where an attacker follows an authorized person into a restricted area. The attacker isn't supposed to be in that area, in the restricted area. So instead, he will quietly follow the authorized person into the restricted area. Piggybacking. It's also a physical security breach. In this scenario, the attacker comes up with a convincing story, gain access to a restricted area. The attacker might claim that they work at the company and forgot the ID at home and they are late for an important meeting. In order to convince the employee that's at the restricted area to allow them to use their keycard to let the attacker into the premises. Shoulder surfing. The attacker stays close to you and tries to observe you while the victim is entering a password or a PIN. This is known as shoulder surfing. Lunchtime attacks. When the employee at a workplace leaves for lunch, the attacker physically tries to gain access to an unsecured device when the employee isn't at the premises. In pretexting social engineering attack, cybercriminals or the attackers impersonate someone else and come up with convincing scenarios to manipulate the target victim into giving up sensitive information, transfer money, or grant access to private networks. To put it simply, these cybercriminals involved, they pretend to be someone else.